It's almost a year now. But before we talk about adjusting, let's talk about the move. The moment you land in Denmark, especially when you land in a city that is not Copenhagen, you can tell it's just mad different. Like, it's just different. We moved to mainland Denmark, right? Which is in Jutland. It's kind of like north of Denmark. I believe I'm saying it right. The north of Denmark to the fourth largest city in Denmark. It's roomier, it's more spacious, it's quieter, and it's just calmer. It's just much calmer. Typically, I would see people that look like me. Very few and far between. You can count. And when you do see these people, by the way, you might assume, well, maybe they are from somewhere else, right? Because they look like you. But inadvertently, these people are Danish. Like, they just speak Danish. I've had those interactions where I assume, the verbal nod, you know what I mean? And I have a conversation and they have a Danish accent. Even the English sounds Danglish. Do you know what I mean? So you could definitely tell the difference when you move to a city that is not Copenhagen, essentially. So the Danish system is actually a little bit complex. You have to do your own tax assessment. At the moment you land, basically, you have to go through your commune. Commune is basically your local authority, right? They basically connect you to like everything. In fact, they basically give you an identity in Denmark, essentially. You can't really move forward without that. It says, if you delay anything with local authority, essentially you delay everything else further down the line, because they will provide you with something called a MitID. And MitID is your social security number, which is your ID, your digital ID, essentially. If you don't have that, if you don't have that, you're basically Jason Bourne, right? You are present, you're there, but you're nobody, essentially. So you need that to basically connect to other systems, because external systems will interlink to that, especially when you're signing contractual agreements for whatever it might be, maybe a lease, a rent, and they want to use that to verify your identity. And you don't have that. You basically can't do that. You could do a CO. A CO basically is care of ownership. In the case of an address, I could talk about it another time. But it's complex because it has all these interlaying connections between different services. But at the head of that, you need a MitID in order for that to work. So that's something that's quite important to the process. And when you actually go and sign up for various services, oh man, just the amount of documentation you got to go through that's in Danish. If you don't speak Danish, of course you don't speak Danish, man. Like, Google Translate is going to be your best friend. Like, you spend an awful great deal of time just to be savvy enough to understand exactly what you're signing, or just in conversations, you call services and you reach out to someone who's in Danish, rightly so, you're in a Danish country. You got to deal with that, man. Like, you got to expect that. There's a lot of mental cognitive load in order for you to actually do that, to get into that. And when you're here, or when you plan on getting here, you got no credit history. Like, and that plays such an important fact in Denmark. Like, I suppose that's anywhere, but in Denmark in particular, because of how money actually works here, if you have no credit history, like if you start from scratch, zero, you're a couple of steps back. You're essentially a couple of steps back. Acquiring credit and stuff like that is extremely difficult. Not impossible, but it's extremely difficult. If you have a lot of savings and backers and stuff like that, money makes the world move, you know that, right? So, but if you don't, and you need help from the system in order to facilitate that, and you have no credit history, man, yeah, that's going to be quite tough. Also, the system, there's an assumption that you just know the system, but there's no manual. There's no manual. People will tell you things on how to do certain things, and it's taken us an awful long time to kind of like figure out what needs to happen next. What are the steps? How does the system work? How does banking work? I think like everything else, but you have to appreciate that the learning curve, a lot of the things you need to figure out. Not unless you get help, right? Not unless you have a community already here, you have connections already here. But if you start from scratch, just be aware of all these different factors you need to like consider in order to actually fit in, or be able to to adapt to the system. And let's just touch base on family for a second, right? And if you have a family, you got kids, like Ladcykel, I practiced this like 100 times. A Ladcykel basically, you see those bikes, bucket bikes, essentially. It's kind of like it's just segue into moving around. I would argue and say that that's one of the first things you need to invest in. Obviously, very dependent on where you live, right? Because that will get you everywhere, given the distances are relatively close. And that's one of the things, personally, I love about Denmark. If I want to go to the cinema, I can use that. If I want to go to, if I want to go shopping, supermarket, I can use that. If I want to go, see a show, whatever, and everything's just accessible. And without even need to drive, you can, and the reason why I love that is because I'm a gym rat. I'm obsessed with like just constant movement, basically staying healthy and things like that, right? And that bicycle basically allows you to do that without inadvertently having to use additional willpower to kind of achieve that. But anyway, I digress a little bit. A Ladcykel is basically your segue to getting everywhere, assuming you can afford that, right? Because as we said, right, these things are like cars and they're mad expensive. You can get secondhand ones, of course, but they're super expensive. So bike, as you know, Copenhagen, Denmark, so synonymous, right? You assume Denmark with bikes and stuff like that. So it's definitely a must-have. If there's one thing where you take from that, right? If you're moving here, is like try and invest in one of those, especially when you got family and young kids, because it'll go a long way for sure. And once you get that, it's basically freedom. It's just basic freedom. And if you're worried about like riding on the roads and stuff like that, well, welcome to the deep end. It's not as crazy as like riding a bike in London, right? But it's kind of like everything, right? Because it will get you, like I said, not to ramble on about that, it will get you like everywhere. Do you know what I mean? It's freedom. It's the rhythm. It's just the way things work in Denmark, basically. And the financial setup is different, even like pensions, because you can have private pensions, you can have ATP pensions, basically like these are like contributions to your pension, things like that. Some of them have nothing at all. So funny enough, like even last week, I'm still sorting out my pension. I've almost been here like a year. I'm still talking to companies to get my pensions actually set up. So touching base on what I said earlier, actually, about it's like being complex. Those are some of the things that you kind of like need to figure out within the workplace, because it's quite difficult, like I said, to really understand how the system works in that respect. You almost have to build those things like an a la carte menu, right? You basically, piece by piece, you have your pension, you get your pension, this private company takes your pension, that gets shipped over to another company to invest in your pensions. And you have to figure out, like, why do I have to sign up to all these things? And some of these things are not entirely mandatory, but given how the system actually works, it's why taxes are high, I think. And it's why the system almost feeds in itself based on those high taxes. And over time, you start to realize that you're not paying into a system, right? You are basically kind of like stepping into a system. You're not paying into it so you can fit in. You're stepping into it. So stepping into it means that you have to put all these parts together in order to actually get that to work. Do you know what I mean? It's a lot. I know it's a lot. Even when you're prepared, you're really not prepared. And for the most of us, you move here, you're excited, you're gassed, and you're like, yeah, I'm in a new country. But there's all this work you need to do in order to actually settle in, and forget the nuances around how much rent costs, how much you're going to pay for travel, how much you're going to pay for insurance and things like that. Forget the nuances. There's tons of videos about that stuff. But I just want to give you a different perspective on things at scale, and looking at it from that perspective as to when thinking about moving here, maybe somebody's going to adopt it to other countries. These are some of the things that I feel one should really think about when they want to, particularly in this case, move to Denmark. And even after when all the paperwork has still been done, like you've done all the paperwork, it still kind of feels out of reach. And after like almost a year to date, we're really starting to get like a sense of normality, like a sense that it's, okay, we're starting to fit into the system. We're starting to step into the system. And like I said earlier, right? And because what that will really tells you is, even after you've done the checklist, the real adjustment is still yet to begin. So I just wanted to use that to just talk about just kind of like the involvement was actually involved to actually adjust. The involvement was actually involved to actually adjust. Like, what do you need to do? Like, your mindset basically about the other things you need to do now to consider, or things you need to consider basically moving to Denmark. So if any of that basically resonates with you, yo man, just let me know what you think, what you're thinking about, if this is something you do or thinking about doing, and just hit me up if you've got questions and stuff like that. Until tape 2 or until part 2 of this, deuce, stay blessed.